Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. 5 most important breakout players for this Florida Gators program heading into 2024. And this is, at least in my mind, an extremely exciting conversation to have specifically with this Florida program, because you look at this roster heading into 2024, it is seemingly chock full with guys that could break out during the 2024 year. And I think largely a reason why a lot of national media members are kind of sleeping on this team, because a lot of these guys didn't necessarily break out in 2023, but certainly have the capability to break out in 2024 and make this Florida Gators program an awfully dangerous team in the SEC. Extremely excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Florida Gator fans. Y'all know I've had a blast talking this program. The amount of support that you guys have shown the boys, whether we're breaking down the recruiting trail, previewing 2024, it truly does mean a lot. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, for the Florida Gator fans, I would love to hear some other names that I did not include in this list down in the comment section. Again, a ton of names to choose from heading into 2024. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to start at, by far in my mind, the most important position for this Florida Gators program. That is on the offensive line, specifically at the offensive tackle spot. Now, going back and watching some Gators games from 2023, and I kind of come away and saying, I don't think this offensive line was as bad as a lot of people like to say. You look at the inside of the offensive line, it certainly wasn't great, but it definitely wasn't a liability. But you look at Damian George at that tackle position last year and say he was a liability. Now he's kicking into guard, which I think we all feel a lot better about. At the end of the day, Florida has, in my mind, 3 offensive tackles that are starting caliber guys. Brendan Crenshaw-Dixon, Austin Barber, you're bringing Devin Manuel from Arkansas. The big question is, can you get 2 really solid tackles heading into 2024? And I look at Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon and say this could be a massive upgrade from what we had in 2023. You take a look at Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon. He's played not only at a very high level at San Diego State, this kid has played a ton of football. He's one of the most experienced offensive tackles that you see in the country, over 2,400 snaps played. You go back to the 2023 season, he only gave up 6 quarterback hurries all year. I mean, that is a massive step in the right direction from what you got in 2023. And I think one of the big questions for Florida is if Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon can come from the Mountain West at San Diego State, come into the SEC and be a quality starting tackle for this Gators program, that is one reason to massively believe in this Florida Gators team in 2024. If they can fix some of the problems that they had on the offensive line, specifically at the tackle spot, this team's going to be dangerous. And you got Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, you got Devin Manuel, you got Austin Barber. Those are 3, in my mind, starting caliber tackles. Can you get good play out of them in 2024? Going to be a massive question mark in my mind. Just the most important breakout player for this Florida Gators program. Going to number 2, let's go to the wide receiver room, and a guy that the Florida Gator fans who've been rocking with the fellas for the last, 2 years at this point know I'm a massive fan of Aiden Mizell. And I think there are some reasons to explain why he didn't necessarily break out as a true freshman, going back to his senior year of high school. Missed all of his senior season with a knee injury. He comes into Florida. I think he needed to put on some weight, have some development, kind of from a physical and kind of from a football field standpoint, I think going into year 2, you could get a much better version of Aiden Mizell. And why I think Aiden Mizell is so important is you look at the Florida Gators wide receiver room and say, we have some guys that are elite working the short intermediate route tree, right? Eugene Wilson, Elijah Badger are 2 of the best wide receivers in the country operating after the catch. I think what we're looking for from Florida, and we've talked about this extensively during the offseason, is can Florida make teams respect what they can do down the field a little bit more? And I think a guy like Aiden Mizell can provide the Florida Gators that type of juice. This is a guy that at 6'2" ran a 10.6 coming out of high school in the 100-meter dash. He's a big frame that can work vertically down the field. If you can make opposing defenses respect what you're doing vertically down the field, have to put their safeties over top guys like Aiden Mizell, that's going to mean massive opportunities for guys like Eugene Wilson and Elijah Badger, kind of working those shorter intermediate parts of the football field. I think a couple other names to probably keep an eye on is Tremere Dike. Now, doesn't have the blazing speed that Aiden Mizell does, but has a big-time body and frame. He's a guy that has worked vertically down the field very well at Wisconsin. If they can find some wide receivers that can better allow Graham Mertz in this offense to attack down the field, I think that's just going to open up this Florida Gators offense in a massive way. We know Graham Mertz can make those throws. We just got to see it on a more consistent basis, and him having pass catchers that can allow him to work vertically more, I think it's going to mean massive things, not only for Eugene Wilson and Elijah Badger underneath, but also getting that run game going as well. Aiden Mizell, very important breakout player for this Florida Gators program. Going to the defensive side of the football, and again, we talked about laundry list of players. On the defensive line, it's extremely long. You take a look at Kelby Collins going into year 2, a guy that flashed some freaky stuff as a freshman, as a true freshman in the SEC. That is extremely rare. What can he look like going into year 2? I think you could say the same thing for guys like Cam James, like TJ Searcy. I mean, you have guys like Tyreek Sapp who played some really good football. Justice Boone coming back from injury. I look at this Florida Gators defensive line and say there are a lot of names that can emerge as difference makers for this Florida Gators program. That's not even to mention 5-star defensive lineman LJ McCray also coming in as a true freshman. I look at this defensive line and say one of the other big storylines for this Florida Gators program is how good can this defensive line be? Because I think there is a reality where this Gators defensive line can be very physically imposing and dominant in the SEC. And if that does take place, we do see that version of this Florida defensive line in 2024. Some of these guys like Kelby Collins truly break out. You're looking at a defense that I can think can be extremely dangerous in the SEC as well. Going to another defensive player that I am just fired up about, and that's Pup Howard. Now, he's coming in from South Carolina, did not play his best football at South Carolina. You could kind of tell he was a true freshman. Going into year 2, is he putting it together between the ears a little bit better? Because you look at Pup Howard and just say 6'4", 235 pounds. He's one of the more freakier linebackers from a physical trait standpoint that you'll see across the country. And you have a coach in Ron Roberts coming in who I think is a mastermind in developing linebackers. Similar to how we talked about with this Florida Gators defensive line, I look at this Florida Gators linebacker room and say Shamar James can continue to take strides going into year 3. Pup Howard can take a massive stride going into year 2. You're looking at a linebacker room that has the potential to be one of the better units in the SEC as well. A lot of potential in this front 7 for the Florida Gators. Working to our last player on the list, and that's going to be Sharif Denson, kind of playing that star position. Now, didn't play a ton of football for the Florida Gators as a true freshman, played a lot against Florida State, and played some really good football. And I think what's a good spot for Florida is you have a guy in Sharif Denson who I think has a big-time ceiling. I think he can be an impact player at a position that's really important in the modern era of college football, but more importantly, very important in the Austin Armstrong defense. I mean, you look at the different things Armstrong wants to do on defense, a lot of different looks, sending guys from the second level in blitz packages. This is a very important position. I think Sharif Denson, a guy that can kind of do a lot of different things that you're going to ask him to do. He can be in run support, being around the box, being around the line of scrimmage. He can deal with some of those bigger jumbo wide receivers. He checks a lot of boxes from a physical trait standpoint and just didn't get a ton of opportunity to play as a true freshman going into year 2 in a position that there's just going to be a lot on your plate. Can he be a breakout player for this Florida Gators defense? And the good spot that I think Florida's in is, all right, say Sharif Denson doesn't quite take that step going into year 2, which I do think he does take that step. You have other guys that you know what they're capable of, right? DJ Douglas come to the portal. He's played a ton of football. You know he can give you high-level plays. So we're not forced to play a guy like Sharif Denson if he's not necessarily ready. We have a guy like DJ Douglas who could very easily play that kind of position and give you some good reps, which is a very different conversation than we had last year for this Florida Gators program all over the football. You look at last year, the depth of this program was just really not there. There were players that had to play. They weren't ready to play, but had to play because there wasn't anyone behind them that you could play over. You look at Florida going into 2024, it's a lot of young talent that we expect to take that step. But if those guys are not necessarily ready, there's some veteran guys that can give you really quality SEC snaps as well. And I think that's one of the reasons to really believe in this Florida Gators program is the young talent is there. And if they take that step, this team can be extremely dangerous. But I think there's that floor too, even on the defensive line with guys like Tariq Sapp and Justice Boone coming back. You're not going to have to play young players if they're not necessarily ready, which was, again, just a different conversation from last year. Florida had to play multiple guys that just weren't ready to play in the SEC yet. This year, it's going to be a different story with a lot of young talent that can provide what I think is a really high ceiling for this Florida Gators program. Fired up for the season. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section as well. If you all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.